Pedagogy of Environmental Studies, Unit 2, Understanding Teaching and Learning EVS from the Perspective of Learners. Vygotsky. Vygotsky was born in the town of Orsha, Belarus, into a non-religious, middle-class, Russian, Jewish family. Vygotsky was a Soviet psychologist, the founder of an unfinished theory of human, cultural, and biosocial development commonly referred to as cultural historical psychology. He began his career at the Psychological Institute as a staff scientist. By the end of 1925, Vygotsky completed his dissertation on the psychology of arts. He remained virtually unknown to the outside world until the early 1980s, when the popularity of the developmental psychology of Jean Piaget started to decline. And in contrast, Vygotsky's notion of the zone of proximal development became a central component of the development of new paradigm in developmental and educational psychology. Vygotsky's cultural historical theory of cognitive development or socio-cultural theory. Socio-cultural theory was created by Vygotsky as a response to behaviorism. The main idea of the theory is that people interact with each others and with the culture they live in, and in turn it shapes their mental abilities. Vygotsky believed that parents, relatives, peers, and societies all have an important role in cognitive development of the child. Socio-cultural theory is the belief that every function in the child's cultural development appears twice. First on the social level, later on an individual level. This means that the skills children learn first are related to interactions with others, and they then take that information and use it within themselves. The role of culture and social interactions are imperative to cognitive development. Vygotsky cultural historical theory of cognitive development is focused on the role of culture in the development of higher mental functions such as speech and reasoning in children. His theory is sometimes referred to as having a socio-cultural perspective, which means the theory emphasizes the importance of society and culture for promoting cognitive development. Vygotsky believed that adults in a society foster children's cognitive development in an intentional and systematic manner by engaging them in challenging and meaningful activities. Assumptions of Vygotsky's theory. There are 6 major assumptions which guide Vygotsky's theory. We will discuss each one generally. The first assumption of Vygotsky theory is that through both informal and formal conversations and education, adults convey to children the way their culture interprets and responds to the world. The second assumption of Vygotsky's theory is that thought and language becomes increasingly independent in the first few years of life. The third assumption explains that complex mental processes begins as social activities. Vygotsky also introduced the idea that children can perform more challenging tasks when assisted by more advanced and competent individuals. Vygotsky identified two levels of development: actual development, which is the upper limit of tasks a child can perform individually, and level of potential development, which is the upper limit of tasks a child can perform with the assistance of a more competent individual. The next assumption is that challenging tasks promote maximum cognitive growth. The final assumption is that play allows children to stretch themselves cognitively. After learning and understanding the major assumptions of Vygotsky's theory, we conclude that there are three key areas of socio-cultural theory as follows. Number one, private speech. Number two, make-believe play. And number three, zone of proximal development. Private speech. Private speech takes place when children talk to themselves. Vygotsky saw this as the starting point for all mental developments. He believed that it is the process of privatizing speech that higher forms of consciousness arise on the inner plane, and in this way our biological capacities are organized into a culturally mediated mind. According to Vygotsky, speech begins as a means of communication and socializing and later becomes a tool of thinking. He suggested that children spoke to themselves as a way of guiding themselves through an action. Make believe play. Vygotsky saw make believe play as an important part of child development. It is one of the main ways of developing during the preschool years. Children use make-believe play to test multiple skills and achieve important cultural abilities. Vygotsky suggested that as children take part in made-up situations, they learn how to act in agreement with their internal ideas, not just external ideas. Make-believe play allows children to practice how they would act in the real world. Zone of proximal development, or in short, ZPD. The zone of proximal development is an area of learning that a child can achieve independently without the guidance and encouragement from a teacher or peer. In the diagram, there are three concentric circles with different shades like green, blue, and yellow. The area in the inner circle shaded in green represents the zone where learner can perform any task unaided by his teachers or peers. In the middle circle, shaded in blue, represent the zone of proximal development, where learners cannot complete the tasks unaided but can complete them with guidance either from the teacher or an expert adult. The zone of proximal development is the difference between what a learner can do without help and what he or she can do with help. It is a concept introduced, yet not fully developed by Vygotsky during the last 10 years of his life. Vygotsky and some other educators believe that the role of education is to give children experiences that are within the zones of proximal development, thereby encouraging and advancing their individual learning. One example of children using zone of proximal development is dancing. When a child is learning how to dance, he or she looks to others around him or her on the dance floor and copy their moves. In this way, a child learns how to dance by imitating peers or an expert dancer. Scaffolding. During building construction, workers build support columns to temporarily hold the building, and when the structure can withstand on its own, these support columns are slowly removed. So scaffolding are like these temporarily support structure or structure of support points for performing an action. In education, scaffolding refers to the help or guidance received from an adult or a more competent peer to help the child to work within the zone of proximal development. Although Vygotsky himself never mentioned the term, scaffolding was first used by Jerome Bruner, David Wood, and Gail Ross while applying Vygotsky concept of zone of proximal development to various educational contexts. Scaffolding is a process through which a teacher or a more competent peer helps the student in his or her zone of proximal development. An example of scaffolding is when someone is learning how to drive. During the course of driving, the driving instructor guides learner along the way by showing them the mechanics of how the car operates, the correct hand positions on the steering wheel, the techniques of scanning the road, and so on. As the learner progresses, less and less instruction is needed until the learner is ready to drive on his own. Classroom implication of Vygotsky's theory. Various investigations using different approaches and research frameworks have proved that collaborative learning to be effective in many kinds of settings and contexts. Teachers should assign tasks that students cannot do on their own, but which they can do with assistance. So teacher should understand that learner should be provided with just enough assistance to learn to complete the task independently and then provide an environment that enables learners to do harder tasks that would otherwise be impossible. In the context of adults, peers should challenge each other in order to support collaboration and success. To summarize, we have learned about Vygotsky Cultural Historical Theory of Cognitive Development, which is also known as Socio-Cultural Theory, which emphasizes about the role of culture in the development of higher mental functions such as speech and reasoning in children. Then we also learn some of his assumptions. We also try to understand about the three key areas of socio-cultural theory, that is, private speech, make-believe play, zone of proximal development. We also learn about scaffolding. And the last but not the least, classroom implication of Vygotsky's theory. Thank you.